Thank you for watching part 1. Please watch part 2 to the end and click the subscribe button. The night did not end with Robert's envelope on my porch. It ended with flashing lights, shouting voices, and me gripping the kitchen counter to stop my body from collapsing under the weight of it all. Grace had sprinted outside before Ruth, or I could stop her. By the time I reached the porch, officers had returned, their radios crackling as they pulled James off Robert like hunters dragging a wolf from its prey. The envelope lay crushed on the mat, the first page bent, a muddy shoe print pressed across words I couldn't quite see. One officer lifted it carefully into an evidence bag, while another tightened the cuffs on James. He wasn't smiling this time. His face was red, twisted, spitting curses at Robert. "Traitor," he shouted. "You'll regret this. Both of you. All of you." Robert sat on the curb, shoulders shaking, palms pressed to his face. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, like the boy who used to hide behind my legs when thunderstorms rattled the windows. "Mrs. Reeves," Officer Hart said when she arrived moments later, "this escalates things. He violated a protective order and attempted assault. He won't be out again tonight." She crouched down, lowering her voice. "But tomorrow morning, you'll need to be ready. Guardianship hearing at 9. We'll be there, and so will your lawyer. Can you handle it?" I looked at Grace standing tall beside me, Ruth's hand steady on my shoulder, Robert weeping on the curb. My lungs burned with every breath, but the fire inside me was stronger. "Yes," I said. "I can handle it. Tomorrow, they'll hear the truth." Morning came heavy and gray, the kind of sky that presses down on a town until even the birds fly low. Ruth drove me to the courthouse, her hands white-knuckled on the wheel. Grace sat beside me with her tablet open, scrolling through notes. "We have the lab results," she whispered. "We have the recording. We have the pharmacy testimony. We have the video from last night. It's enough." But I knew James. Enough was never enough for him. Inside the courthouse, the guardianship hearing was already buzzing. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years had come to watch. Some looked at me with pity, others with thinly veiled curiosity. The bailiff called the case, and we stepped into the lion's den. James sat across the aisle in a suit too expensive for his soul. His lawyer, a slick man with a smile sharp as scissors, shuffled papers theatrically. Robert sat beside him, but apart, his eyes down, his hands clenched. Judge Merriman, a stern woman with silver hair pulled into a bun, adjusted her glasses. "We are here for the petition of James Reeves to appoint guardianship over his mother, Clara Reeves, age 76. Allegations of incompetence and self-neglect have been filed. Evidence will be presented." James's lawyer leapt up first. "Your Honor, my client is deeply concerned for his mother. She has undergone lung surgery, suffers from confusion, and has made alarming claims of poisoning and conspiracy. We believe she is vulnerable and incapable of managing her affairs safely. Here," he held up a document in a clear sleeve. "We submit her signed directive requesting no heroic measures and authorizing her sons to make medical decisions." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. I felt Grace stiffen beside me. That was the big one. The forged paper James had threatened. But Daniel Reeves rose calmly, his voice smooth as river stone. "Your Honor, we object. We will show that this document is fraudulent. And we have proof, medical labs, police reports, recorded conversations, and witnesses, that the petitioner is not acting in his mother's best interest but in his own." The judge nodded. "Proceed." And so we did. Officer Hart played the recording. James's voice filled the courtroom, smooth lies unraveling into self-incrimination. Robert's careful counting of doses. My own weary questions. The courtroom buzzed like a hive. The lab report was read aloud, sedatives and cardiac depressants in the thermos. James's fingerprints on the cup. The pharmacy footage rolled, showing James picking up the diazepam refill with my ID. Finally, the porch camera video lit the screen. James pounding on my door with a folder, Grace standing between us, the police cuffing him as he shouted threats. The courtroom was silent when it ended. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Reeves, do you wish to respond?" James stood, his face red, his charm gone. only fury left. She's lying. She's making this up to cut us out. She never loved us. She's always been about control. You think a sick old woman is credible? You think she knows what she's signing? Look at her. She can barely breathe without a machine. The judge's eyes narrowed. Sit down, Mr. Reeves.
Now.
Robert stood slowly. His voice shook, but it carried. Your Honor, he's right about one thing. She can barely breathe. But he's wrong about everything else. I went along with it. I counted doses. I told myself it was medicine. It wasn't. I was a coward. But my mother is not incompetent. She's the strongest person I've ever known. And if anyone deserves guardianship here, it's her over me, not the other way around. A murmur swept the courtroom. James spun on him. Shut up. You don't know what you're doing. Robert's hands shook, but his eyes lifted. For the first time in my life, James, I do. The judge struck her gavel once, silencing them both.
She turned to me.
Mrs. Reeves, do you have anything to say before I make my ruling? I rose, my chest aching, my voice low but steady. Your Honor, I may be old. I may be stitched and scarred. But my mind is clear. And my son's betrayal has never been clearer. I don't need guardianship. What I need is justice. And what they need is the truth, whether they want it or not. The judge studied me for a long moment. Then she turned to James's forged document. This directive, the signature doesn't match. And given the evidence, I find it fraudulent. She looked back at him. Mr. Reeves, not only is your petition denied, but you may expect criminal charges. Her gavel fell again. Case dismissed. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scribbled. Neighbors whispered. James slammed his fist on the table, his face twisted with rage. Robert sat back down, tears streaming silently. And me? I felt lighter, but not free, because the DNA results were still unopened in public. And that truth was waiting like a shadow just outside the door. That night, back at the house, we gathered around the kitchen table. Me, Ruth, Grace, and Robert, who had come quietly, humbly, with the manila envelope he'd tried to deliver. Inside was his written confession, signed and dated, every detail laid bare. He set it on the table like an offering. Grace laid another envelope beside it, the DNA results Daniel had unsealed. She looked at me, her voice low. Do you want to open it here, Aunt Clara? With everyone. My hand hovered over the flap. My breath caught, because this was the truth I had avoided for decades. The truth that could tear the last strings of family apart. I opened it, slowly, and there, in black and white, it named one of my sons as Henry's and the other as Daniel's. The DNA paper trembled in my hands like it carried a pulse of its own. The words blurred through the sting in my eyes, but the truth was clear enough to cut steel. Only one of my boys was Henry's by blood. The other belonged to Daniel Reeves, the man who had held my hand when grief nearly destroyed me, the man who had given me strength when my lungs gave out on more than breath. I whispered the words aloud, my voice cracking in the kitchen silence. Only one of you is truly Henry's son. Robert sat perfectly still, his face pale, his knuckles white around the edge of the table. Grace leaned forward, her lips parted, her eyes flicking between us. Ruth set her hand gently over mine as if to keep the paper from floating away. And in that silence, the absence of James was louder than his presence had ever been. He was not here, but his shadow hung over the room like smoke. He hadn't heard it yet. He didn't know which of them was blood and which was secret. And I knew, with a shiver that ran down my spine, that when he found out, he would turn that truth into a weapon sharper than any knife. I looked at Robert. It's you, I whispered. You are Henry's. You carry his blood. James. My throat closed around the name. James is not. Robert's breath caught like a sob he wasn't ready to release. Me, he whispered. I'm his. Yes, I said. And more than that, you've always been mine. Even when you hid behind silence. Even when you followed your brother's lead. You are Henry's son. James is Daniel's. Grace exhaled sharply, like the air itself had been waiting. Ruth pressed her lips together, her eyes fierce but wet. Robert shook his head slowly. "That's why he's always been different," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "That's why he never cared about Dad's shop, Dad's ways. He carried Daniel in him all along." He laughed bitterly. "And I carried Dad. And I still let him lead me into darkness." "You can step out of it," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Blood doesn't decide who you become. Choices do." But I knew the truth. James would never accept this. To him, the inheritance wasn't just money, it was identity, proof of belonging, proof of control. And now, the foundation of his life had cracked. By morning, the news had spread through Willow Creek like wildfire. Court clerks whispered. Neighbors gossiped. By the time Ruth drove me to the grocery store for milk, 2 strangers had already asked in hushed tones if it was true that one son wasn't Henry's. Truth leaks faster than poison. It stains everything it touches. That afternoon, Officer Hart called with an update. James had posted bail with money no one knew he still had. "He's out," she said, her voice clipped. "He's dangerous. Don't open your door. Don't trust a knock. Patrol will circle the block, but you need to be cautious." The phone barely hit the cradle before Ruth muttered, "He's coming here." We didn't have to wait long. At dusk, the growl of an engine stopped outside my house. Headlights swept across the curtains. The slam of a car door followed. Grace grabbed my arm. "Stay inside." But I couldn't. This was my house. My war. My truth. I stepped onto the porch, the evening air biting my skin, my chest heavy but strong enough to hold what was coming. James stood at the foot of the steps, his eyes wild, his jaw clenched. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked like a man unmoored, like a storm looking for something to break. "So it's true," he spat. "I'm not his son. I'm Daniel's mistake. You lied to me my whole life, and now you dare take everything away." "James," I said, my voice low but steady, "I never wanted to hurt you. I only wanted to protect you." "Protect me?" His laugh was sharp, ugly. "You destroyed me. You made me think I belonged, made me fight for a father who was never mine. And now you put Robert on a pedestal? Robert, the weak one? Robert, who hides behind you and pretends he's innocent."
No.
"I won't let you do this. If I can't have the inheritance, if I can't even have a name, then I'll take something else." Grace stepped forward, her small frame firm as iron. "You won't take anything, Uncle James. Not anymore." His eyes flicked to her, full of rage. "Stay out of this, girl. You don't know what you're protecting." "Yes, I do," she said. "I'm protecting her. And the truth." For a moment, I saw the boy he used to be. The boy who begged for one more bedtime story, who clung to my hand at the doctor's office. But then it was gone, replaced by the man who had poured poison into my cup. He reached into his jacket. My heart froze. But instead of a weapon, he pulled out the forged directive, crumpled from being shoved into too many folders and too many lies. He held it up like a torch. "This still stands. This says you wanted no heroic measures. This says you trusted me. And I'll make sure everyone believes it. The court.
The town.
Even if I have to drag you into a hospital bed and watch you fade." Robert's voice came from behind me, stronger than I'd ever heard it. "Not if I testify," he said, stepping onto the porch. His eyes were locked on James, no longer afraid. "I'll tell them everything. Every lie. Every dose. Every night you stood outside her door counting down her life. You'll never win, James. Not with me standing here." James's face twisted. "You think you can stand against me? You've always been nothing without me." Robert took another step forward. "Then I'll be nothing no longer." The tension snapped like a wire. James lunged up the steps, his hand raised, the directive clenched like a blade. Grace shouted. Ruth grabbed my arm. Robert moved faster than I thought he could, colliding with his brother at the top of the porch. Papers flew into the air like torn feathers, scattering across the yard. The 2 men struggled, fists and fury, years of buried resentment crashing into the night. I screamed for them to stop, my chest burning, but they didn't hear me. They didn't hear anything except the war they had been building since childhood. The fight spilled onto the lawn, their grunts and curses filling the darkness. Neighbors poured out of their houses. Porch lights flicked on. Someone shouted for the police. And then, silence. Robert stood over James, his chest heaving, his face bruised, his fist still clenched. James lay on the ground, blood trickling from his lip, his eyes burning holes into me. "This isn't over," he whispered. "It'll never be over. I'll burn everything you love before I let you in." The sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. The sirens came fast, but not fast enough. By the time the patrol car screeched to a stop and officers separated James from Robert, the damage was already done. Not just the bruises, not the torn papers scattered across the lawn like shredded trust, but the words James had hurled at me before the blue and red lights swallowed him. "I'll burn everything you love before I let you in." He wasn't bluffing. I knew that look in his eyes. I had raised him, I had studied him, and I knew when his rage was a storm that passed, and when it was lightning hunting for something to strike. The officers cuffed James again, reading him his rights. He didn't fight this time. He just stared at me across the lawn, blood on his lip, his grin sharp and cold. "You'll see, Mom," he said calmly. "You'll see tomorrow." Those words sat heavy in my chest long after they drove him away. Back inside, the house felt too small for all the fear it now held. Grace sat at the table, her hands trembling as she gathered the torn papers of the forged directive. Robert pressed an ice pack to his cheek, wincing with every breath. Ruth paced the kitchen, muttering curses she'd never said in church. I sank into my chair, exhausted, my body reminding me I was stitched and scarred, not built for battles. "He's not done," I whispered. "No," Robert admitted, his voice low. "He has something planned. He's been talking about it for weeks. Something final." Grace snapped her head up. "Final?" Robert nodded slowly. "He said if Mom cut him out, he'd make sure she had nothing left to cut. He said fire cleans everything." Ruth froze mid-step. "Fire?" The room went still. The weight of the word hung there, heavier than the night itself. The next day, the guardianship petition dismissed. My lawyer Daniel met me at the courthouse steps with a DNA report in his hand. "It's official," he said. "Robert is Henry's. James is mine." His voice cracked on that last word, the burden of a secret carried too long. I looked him in the eye. Blood doesn't excuse what he's done. He made his choice. Daniel nodded, but his eyes were wet. "I'll testify. I'll stand with you, whatever comes next." And something in his tone told me he knew James's next move would not be inside a courtroom. By evening, Ruth and Robert had checked the locks twice, and Grace had set up her laptop by the window, monitoring the porch camera. The neighborhood was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your skin like a warning. At 10:43 p.m., the smell hit first, faint, acrid, curling through the air vents. Ruth wrinkled her nose. "Do you smell that?" Robert was already moving toward the kitchen. "Gasoline." Grace's laptop pinged. The porch camera feed flickered to life, and there he was, James, pouring from a red can along the side of the house, his face twisted in a grimace of determination. My chest tightened. My lungs screamed. I couldn't move fast, but my voice came sharp and strong. "Call the police.
Now."
Robert threw open the back door before I could stop him. "James," he shouted. "Stop." James turned, the gas can dripping in his hand, the ground dark and wet beneath him. He smiled, wild and broken. "You took everything from me, Robert. So I'll take it all back. I'll take this house, this family, this name." He lifted a lighter in his other hand. The tiny flame flickered, hungry. Grace screamed from the porch. "No." Ruth grabbed my arm, pulling me back. My chest ached so fiercely, I thought I'd collapse. But I forced the words out, words that cut sharper than any match. "James, listen to me. You think fire will give you power, but all it will give you is ashes. And even those won't belong to you." For a heartbeat, he hesitated. Just one. His hand trembled. His eyes flicked to Robert, who stood between him and the house, fists clenched, no longer the coward who went along. Don't do it, Robert said firmly. If you light that, you'll kill her. You'll kill me. You'll kill everything left of us. The flame wavered. The sirens wailed again in the distance, closer this time. James's jaw clenched. His hand shook. And then, he dropped the lighter. But not in surrender. He hurled it at the trail of gasoline at Robert's feet. The night exploded into flame. Neighbors screamed. Fire roared up the side of the house like a living beast, hungry and unstoppable. Ruth dragged me back into the hallway, coughing, the smoke stinging my lungs like knives. Grace grabbed the fire extinguisher from under the sink, her face set in pure determination. Robert dove forward, kicking dirt onto the flame, grabbing the hose from the garden to spray the spreading fire. The water hissed against the gasoline, steam rising in angry clouds. James stood there, laughing, the orange glow painting his face like a demon. See? He shouted over the roar. If I can't have it, no one can. Police cars swerved into the driveway, officers leaping out, shouting commands. They tackled him to the ground, the gas can clattering to the pavement. His laughter turned to a scream as they cuffed him, dragging him away. The fire sputtered, shrank, fought, then finally died under Robert's desperate hands and Grace's extinguisher. The house stood, scarred but not gone. I stood in the doorway, coughing, my chest searing, but my voice strong enough to carry. You didn't win, James, I whispered into the night. You never will. But as the smoke curled into the sky and the officers shoved James into the squad car, his eyes met mine through the glass. And even with his face pressed against the window, bruised and broken, he mouthed the words that froze me to the bone. It's not over. The smell of smoke clung to my curtains long after the fire was out. Even after the last ember hissed under the spray of the hose, even after the officers drove James away in handcuffs again, the scent remained, sharp, acrid, and heavy with memory. I sat at the kitchen table that night with Ruth at my side, Grace working furiously on her laptop, and Robert slumped in a chair with his head in his hands. No one spoke. Words felt too fragile, too breakable, in a house that had nearly been reduced to ash. But in my chest, the truth pounded louder than the silence. James wasn't finished. Even fire hadn't satisfied him. And the way he mouthed those words to me, "It's not over," told me he had one more card left to play. The next morning, we didn't have to guess what that card was. It came in the form of whispers. At the grocery store, at the church, on the sidewalk. Neighbors avoided my eyes or looked at me too long. I heard it in fragments. Document suicide, directive forged or not, she signed something. By noon, a knock rattled the door. It wasn't James this time. It was Officer Hart, her face grim. She set a folder on the table and pushed it toward me. We seized his laptop last night after the fire, she said. You need to see this. Inside were scanned pages, copies of the forged directive James had been waving around. But this wasn't just a fake living will anymore. He had emailed it. Dozens of people in town had received it overnight. Neighbors, church members, even a local paper. He had told them all that I was unstable, suicidal, and that I had signed papers asking my sons to end my suffering if I became a burden. He wants to bury you in shame, Officer Hart said softly. He couldn't kill you with poison or fire. Now he wants to kill your name. My hands shook as I held the papers. My throat tightened, the sting of humiliation mixing with fury. For an old woman in a small town, reputation was life itself. And James had chosen it as his final battleground. By evening, the local news was at my driveway, cameras flashing, reporters calling out questions. Mrs. Reeves, did you sign this directive? Are you suicidal? Did your sons have permission to act on your behalf? Grace marched out onto the porch, fire in her young eyes. My grandmother is not suicidal, she snapped. She is stronger than anyone in this town. That document is a lie, and we'll prove it. Her voice shook, but her stance didn't. For a moment, I saw myself in her, a younger me, fierce, unyielding, standing against the weight of men's lies. But the damage was spreading. By nightfall, my pastor called gently, asking if I needed counseling. Old friends left voicemails offering condolences, as if I were already gone. Lies travel fast when truth walks with a cane. Ruth slammed her fist on the table. We won't let him do this. We'll fight it in court, in the paper, in the streets if we have to. Robert lifted his head. His face was hollow, bruised from the fight, but his eyes carried something new. Resolve. It's time I speak, he said quietly. Not just to the court. To everyone. I'll tell the town the truth. What James did, what I did by following him, and what you've survived. Let them hear it from me. I looked at him, my son, Henry's son, the boy who once hid behind silence. Are you ready for the cost of that truth? I asked. He nodded. Silence already cost me more than I can bear. 2 days later, the courtroom was packed for James's preliminary hearing. The charges were stacked: attempted poisoning, fraud, arson, violation of protective orders. But James walked in with that same arrogant stride, his suit crisp, his smirk practiced. He looked around the room like a man taking inventory of enemies. When he saw me sitting with Grace, Ruth, and Robert, his eyes narrowed. But he didn't look defeated. He looked prepared. The prosecutor presented the evidence: lab tests, recordings, video footage. James's lawyer objected at every turn, but the weight of proof was too heavy to ignore. Still, James leaned back in his chair, calm as stone. Then, as if on cue, his lawyer stood and held up the forged directive. Your Honor, he said, his voice smooth, we submit this document as evidence of my client's state of mind. He believed, in good faith, that his mother wished for him to end her suffering if she became incapacitated. While the prosecution paints him as a monster, he was only fulfilling what he thought were her wishes. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The judge frowned, glancing at the paper. For a moment, fear gripped my chest. What if lies drowned out the truth? What if James really turned this into a weapon sharp enough to cut me down? And then Robert stood. His voice cracked at first, but he didn't falter. Your Honor, he said, that document is a forgery. My brother made it. I know, because I helped him deliver the cup. I counted the doses. I stood outside her door while he planned. And I can't stay silent anymore. He tried to kill her. I let him. And this, he pointed at the paper, is just his last attempt to finish what he started. The room erupted. Whispers.
Gasps.
The judge banged her gavel for order. And in the middle of the chaos, James's smirk finally cracked. But even then, he wasn't done. As the bailiff led him out, he twisted in his cuffs and shouted, his voice cutting through the courtroom like a knife. You think you've won? You haven't seen the real truth yet. The truth about her. About our family. You'll all regret siding with her when you find out. And the way he said it, the conviction in his tone, sent a chill through me deeper than any flame or poison had before. Because James still had something hidden. Something darker. Something waiting. That night, back at home, Grace laid her head on my shoulder. What else could he have? She whispered. I stroked her hair with trembling hands. I don't know, but whatever it is, we'll face it. Together. But in my heart, doubt stirred. What if James's real truth wasn't just another lie? What if there was something I hadn't told them? Something buried in my past that he had uncovered? As I lay awake in the dark, the question gnawed at me like a hungry animal. What truth could James possibly hold that would shatter everything? The picture on my phone glowed in the darkness, burning into my eyes. My breath caught. My chest clenched as though the stitches from my surgery had torn open all over again. It was me, younger, fragile, pale from labor. In my arms lay a newborn wrapped in a striped hospital blanket. But the child wasn't James. It wasn't Robert. It was another baby. A third. Grace stirred beside me on the couch where she'd fallen asleep. I quickly dimmed the screen, my fingers trembling. But it was too late. Ruth had seen the look on my face. She reached over and snatched the phone from my hand. Her eyes narrowed at the image. Clara, she whispered. Who is this? I closed my eyes, the weight of decades pressing against me. The past had come crawling out of its grave, dragged out by James like a weapon. It was the summer of 1969. I was young, barely 20, a girl who thought love was the answer to every question. I had gotten pregnant before Henry put a ring on my finger. My parents sent me away to a hospital 3 towns over, ashamed, telling neighbors I was visiting an aunt. That baby was born healthy, strong. But before I could even name him, he was taken, placed for adoption by signatures my father forced me to scrawl while I was still bleeding into hospital sheets. I never told Henry. When we married, when James and Robert came, I buried the memory so deep it became like a stone in the soil. I visited that stone in secret, in dreams, in letters I never sent. And I thought no one else knew.
Until now.
Grace sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes. Grandma, what's going on? Ruth shot me a look, half question, half demand.
Tell her.
Tell them before James does. I swallowed hard, my voice breaking. There was another child. Before Henry. Before either of you. A son I wasn't allowed to keep. He'd be in his 50s now. The room fell silent. Grace blinked at me in shock. Robert, who had been dozing in the armchair, sat bolt upright, staring. Another brother? Robert whispered, his voice hollow. I nodded, shame burning my cheeks. Yes. The phone buzzed again. Another message. Want to meet him? I already did. Attached was another photo, grainy, but clear enough. James, smirking, sitting across a diner booth from a man in his 50s. The man's eyes, my eyes, looked back at the camera. The next day, word spread like wildfire. James had leaked it to the press, framing it not as a hidden wound but as a scandal. Clara Reeves lied about everything, the headline screamed. Neighbors whispered not just about poison and fire now, but about the secret son. In court, James's lawyer pounced on it. How can we trust anything she says, he sneered, when she's hidden an entire child for decades? What else is she lying about? But Daniel Reeves, my lawyer, rose with steel in his spine. The existence of another child has no bearing on attempted murder, fraud, and arson. If anything, it proves the cruelty of the petitioner who exploits family wounds for his own defense. We're not here to judge Clara's past. We're here to judge James's crimes. Still, the damage was done. The courtroom buzzed. The town gossiped. And James's grin widened. That night, Robert confronted me. His voice shook, but his eyes were clear. Why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us grow up thinking it was just us? Tears stung my eyes. Because I was ashamed. Because I thought if I buried it deep enough, it wouldn't hurt you. But I was wrong. Secrets rot in the ground. And now James has dug it up to poison us all. Robert's hand shook as he ran it through his hair. But then he stepped closer. I don't care if there's another brother. I don't care if I'm the only one Henry fathered. You're my mother. That's the truth that matters. Grace put her arm around me. And I'm your granddaughter. And I'll stand with you. James can't take that from us. Ruth nodded firmly. Blood doesn't decide family. Love does. Truth does. The final hearing came a week later. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled, the air thick with tension. James sat in his suit, smug as ever, his new ally, the lost son, sitting in the back row, silent, watching. The prosecutor laid out every piece of evidence: the poison, the forged directive, the fire. Robert testified, voice breaking but honest, confessing his part and condemning his brother. Grace spoke too, fiery and fearless, describing the night she stood between me and James on the porch. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly, my chest aching, my hands trembling on the table. But my voice was steady. Yes, I had another son. Yes, I kept it a secret. I was young, I was scared, and my parents forced me to give him away. That is my shame. But it is not my crime. The crime here is my son James trying to kill me for money. Poison.
Fire. Lies.
That is the truth, and no secret from my past will ever erase it. The judge listened in silence. Then, with a firm hand, she delivered the verdict. James Reeves is guilty on all counts. Fraud, attempted poisoning, attempted arson, and violation of protective orders. He is remanded to custody pending sentencing. The gavel fell. The courtroom erupted. James roared in rage as bailiffs dragged him away, his eyes locked on me. "This isn't over, Mom," he shouted. "Even if they lock me away, your shame will live forever." But I looked back at him, my body trembling, my heart steady. Maybe, but shame doesn't kill. Poison does. Fire does. And those are your legacies, James, not mine. Outside the courthouse, the press swarmed. Questions flew like arrows. But I stood tall, my granddaughter on one side, my son on the other, Ruth behind me like a shield. "Mrs. Reeves," one reporter shouted, "what lesson do you want people to take from this?" I met their eyes, my voice clear, strong. That family is not blood. Family is who stands with you in the fire. Secrets hurt, yes, but greed destroys. My son tried to take my life for money, and he lost everything. My other son found the courage to tell the truth, and he saved us. And my granddaughter proved that light will always expose darkness. The cameras flashed, the crowd murmured, and for the first time in months, I felt peace stir in my chest. That night, in the quiet of my smoke-scarred house, Grace curled up beside me on the couch. Robert sat across from us, holding the manila envelope he had once been too afraid to deliver. "What happens now?" Grace asked softly. I looked at her, at Robert, at the faint glow of the porch light outside. "Now we heal. Now we rebuild. And now we live in the open, with no more secrets." Because James was right about one thing: secrets have power. But truth has more. And though my family had nearly burned to the ground, the truth had saved what mattered most. Lesson: James lost everything to greed, and I nearly lost myself to shame. But love, truth, and courage stood taller than both. Thank you for walking with me through this story. If this touched your heart, reminded you that truth will always outshine lies, and showed you that love, not blood, is what makes a family, then please like, comment, and subscribe. Your story matters too.